Hi folks, this is all the fruit, and olives are maybe the three most closely associated with Mediterranean climate. In fact, one definition for Mediterranean climate is a climate where you can grow olives. Well, the other definition is a climate where the holm oak and related species dominate. Well, here there are a couple quite old olive trees. If you look at the epiphytes on them, this is not Mediterranean. If you look around a little bit more, well, we are in Singapore. We are basically on the equator in a, constantly wet, hot and humid, fully tropical, fully equatorial climate. Nothing Mediterranean at all. And yet, there is a group of old olives growing here. This year in particular, well, could be, depending on when it comes from, could be 500 to 1,000 years old. Could well be 500 to 1,000 years old. So why are they growing here? And does this mean that Singapore has a Mediterranean climate? Well, of course they're growing here because in the gardens by the bay they want to have everything that's great and fancy. They have a really old olive tree somewhere in a greenhouse, where they are trying to make a cooler and drier climate, but they also have a couple out here. So why do those olives, which are the definition of the Mediterranean climate, why do they grow out here in this equatorial climate? Well, it's not so simple with the definition of the Mediterranean climate, you see. Olives? Yeah, growing olives in the Mediterranean climate, but growing them successfully, harvesting them successfully. Like if you recapitulate the Mediterranean climate around the Mediterranean, south of it, the Sahara Desert, is too dry. East of it, the deserts of the Middle East are too dry and too cold. Well, parts of the Sahara are too cold too. North of it, like Central Europe and Southeastern Europe, it's too cold and in some places too wet. And the northwestern area, like northern Spain, northern Portugal, France and the British Isles, they are not too cold, the winters are not too cold, but it's too wet. And that's why you cannot grow olives there successfully. So how it is here? Well, it's definitely not too cold, it's definitely not too dry. It's definitely too wet. Is it too hot? Well, I don't know. It could bring a lot of issues. The olives, they are used to a seasonal climate, so dry and hot summers and cool and moist winters. Having hot and moist climate all year round. Apparently it doesn't kill them. Those olives have been growing here for many years now. Apparently they are suffering a lot from fungal disease. Lots of mushrooms on this here. Yeah, I've seen this a lot in moist climates, even in the Mediterranean and the Canary Islands. So, are those olives surviving, or are they just dying very slowly? I'd say probably the second. I don't see a single fruit or a single flower on them. We are towards the end of November. The leaves, they do look healthy enough. The branches also look healthy enough. Those smaller ones, the complete plants, look healthy enough. This year, well, maybe it's just so old that the wood is starting to rot, and it's rotting faster here in this ever hot, ever humid climate. Maybe it's not dying, but it's just the dead parts are just being consumed by those fungi. This is definitely not the climate where you could grow them successfully, but apparently it's a climate where they can survive for decades and maybe even longer. I like those old olive trees which are being planted here and there in parks, but also usually they have been taken from some ancient landscapes where they have formed the integral part of the landscape for centuries. I hope that they are protected in some way, but no, in many Mediterranean countries if you are a farmer who is too lazy to harvest these olives every year, you just take a bulldozer and harvest the olive trees once and sell them for tens of thousands of euros each, instead of getting a couple dozen euro in olive oil from such a tree each year. Well, with such a tree you can make as much profit as you can make in 100 years with the oil. So yeah, I mean, sometimes it's good when you want to build new houses or new roads and need to save the olive trees. Sometimes it's good to sell them, but usually they are old trees like this are just being uprooted for the cause of greed. It's a little bit different with cacti and agaves and such stuff in the US. There are laws now that you can only harvest the plants when there is some development and they will be destroyed anyways. You cannot go to the desert and harvest them. Apparently with the olive trees, if you are the owner of the land, you can uproot the olive trees and sell them. So what do you think, folks? How long will those olive trees live on here in Singapore on the equator? Are they gonna produce fruits? I mean, Singapore is predominantly Chinese, but the countries around Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, they're all Muslim, and for them, the olive, just like the date palm, is quite significant religiously. So I wonder why I have never seen olives in the other countries, but just here in Singapore, where the Muslims are a minority. What do you think, folks, about transplanting olives, about the chances of those olives to survive and fruit here? Please tell me, I'm really interested in your opinion. Apart from that, stay tuned for a lot more fruit videos from the beautiful and fruit-rich city of Singapore. And of course, don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe.